We've got to work on fixing the gut so the brain can be healthy. And we do what's called a 5R program. If you eat a lot of food, then you have a lot of GI upset. This actually can trigger brain fog later, and digestive enzymes have been shown to be helpful with that. When you heal your gut, you actually upgrade your brain. And if you know anybody that struggles with mental health and they aren't addressing gut issues, they're missing one of the biggest pictures that can make a difference. Fixing your gut is better than any drug as a pharmacist that I can give you.
Welcome to The Trusted Pharmacist, where you'll learn the truth about how the body works.
Welcome back to The Trusted Pharmacist. I'm your host, Steve Hofford. And did you know that meal you ate this morning could be talking to your brain? And is it telling it good stuff or is it telling it bad stuff? Searches for gut-brain health have increased by 80% this year because people are starting to figure out that your brain and your gut talk. And if you don't work on those together, you're not going to have good mental health, and that's going to lead to problems down the road. Because the way I see it, there's not going to be some big drug breakthrough that's going to change your mental health in terms of anxiety, mood, focus issues. It's actually going to be how you fix your gut and your gut microbiome that's going to make the biggest difference. Because honestly, if they could put that into a drug, they would make millions of dollars. So in today's episode, we're going to uncover how stress, diet, inflammation, and lifestyle disrupt the communication between your gut and your brain, and then simple principles that you can take on to actually help fix that communication to make it healthy and improve your overall gut health, and more importantly, your brain health. So first, let's understand this connection. Did you know you have something called a vagus nerve? And this is a nerve that basically runs from your gut to your brain. And about 80% of that communication happens through that vagus nerve with your brain. And it's a continuous feedback loop from what's going on in your gut to what's going on in your brain. And they talk back and forth constantly. They use inflammatory mediators. They use chemical signals. They use inflammation markers to talk and communicate so that they get a better understanding of the health of each other, how the brain and the gut are working. And if you don't believe how important this is, one single meal can affect this talking together. When you eat a meal and within about 15 minutes, your gut and brain begin to talk through this vagus nerve. And it can affect things like your heart rate variability, and then also actually how calm your brain is depending on the type of food that you eat. Another way that the gut and the brain talk is through your immune system. Your body unfortunately produces something called lipopolysaccharides. These are the breakdown products of the gram-negative bacteria in the gut. And when these are able to escape the gut, they can turn on something called the TLR system. TLR4, and more importantly, CD14, and this cuts on the immune system. And this triggers some inflammatory cytokines, things like interleukin-6 and tumor TNF-alpha. And these actually are signaling molecules that actually were initially triggered by the gut that then go to the brain and cut on inflammation. And when these inflammatory signals hit the brain, they cut on something called the microglia. This is the microglial cells of the brain are the immune system specifically for the brain. And when you have chronic stimulation or chronic LP(s), you have chronic turning on of this inflammatory process, and that leads to neuronal inflammation. And we found through studies that when you have neuronal inflammation, these microglial cells get cut on. They're very hard to get cut off. And we notice things like low motivation, anxiety, and problems with stress, foggy thinking when our brain microglial cells are cut on. And when this happens, it's really tricky to get things reset back to normal. And keep in mind, this is all because this inflammation started in the gut that's now talking to the brain. Next, there are metabolic messengers that are key to maintain the barriers of your blood-brain barrier and your gut barrier. And these are called short-chain fatty acids. There's three main ones that your gut bacteria make. They're typically made from fibers, and these are things like propionate, butyrate, and acetate. And without these, the gastrointestinal lining can fall apart, your blood-brain barrier falls apart, and we've even shown that the short-chain fatty acid, especially butyrate, can be critical in terms of your body making something called BDNF. That's brain-derived neurotropic factor, which is like rocket fuel for your brain. In addition, butyrate has actually been shown to rewrite the genes in the brain to help reduce inflammation. And one recent study is very interesting. It shows that patients who are low in butyrate, keep in mind that's a short-chain fatty acid that's made in your gut, when it's low, it actually has been linked to cognitive decline and higher microglial activity, which means more brain inflammation. So as you can see, That short chain fatty acid butyrate is so critically important, not only for gut health, but also for brain health. Next, did you know your gut bacteria play a huge role in your neurotransmitters? The neurotransmitters of serotonin, dopamine, and GABA are all dictated by the health of your gut. 95% of your serotonin lives in that gut lining, and believe it or not, if you have overall systemic inflammation, this can control and block how much serotonin gets to the brain. And even more importantly, the health of your gut bacteria controls how tryptophan ultimately turns into something like serotonin, which is your calming neurotransmitter, but then also something called kynurenine, which can be an inflammatory or excitatory neurotransmitter, which can cause all types of problems and cause anxiety and stress in the brain. And finally, there's some really cool evidence lately talking about bile acid salts. These are the things that are produced to help your body absorb nutrients in what you eat and the supplements you take, and in terms of how well your brain works and have an energy. And new data shows that the microbial changes in your gut actually have the ability to regulate your mitochondria and that energy production, but more importantly, control microglial tone in the brain. So keep in mind, if you know you have gallbladder issues, or you know don't even have a gallbladder, you have changes in bile, and this can have a dramatic impact on your brain. There's a lot of new data actually linking this bile acid issue, microbial changes in the brain, and actually its early progression and starts to Alzheimer's disease. So keep in mind, this is some newer data, but it shows how important all the different ways that your gut health can affect your overall brain health. So now that we talked about all the ways the gut and brain talk, now let's talk about where things go wrong. And one of the biggest problems I see is stress. And the effect on that HPA axis, that's the way your body makes cortisol and handles that daily stress that never ends every day. So first and foremost, chronic high cortisol leads to something called a reduced IgA. And this is an immunoglobulin your body makes to protect the gut lining. It reduces inflammation. But when IgA drops due to high cortisol, this can cause issues in terms of slow and gastric motility, which then leads to a problem in terms of increased inflammation and actually can disrupt how your body maintains a good, healthy amount of bacteria and can cause something called dysbiosis, which means you have too many bad bacteria or not enough good bacteria. Second, high stress actually changes the microbial composition of your gut, and that can actually happen in just a matter of hours. But in addition, with high cortisol, you also make less of those short-chain fatty acids, and we've talked about how important those are for maintaining your gut and also protecting your brain. And then the last thing is the really big one is long-term chronic stress pokes holes in that gut lining, causes leaky gut, which allows that LPS, which we talked about earlier, to get out, trigger low-grade inflammation, which ultimately triggers low-grade inflammation in the brain, which leads to all your anxiety, stress, depression, brain fog. And there's so many studies to show that high chronic stress is a disaster not only for your gut, but also for your brain. And while we're talking about leaky gut, and we explained how it can cause leaky brain, there's other things that can cause leaky gut more than just stress. Those are things like gluten. It's been shown to poke holes in the gastrointestinal tract. Alcohol is horrible for this. It's also another big issue is chronic infections. And these over time can cause that gut lining to fall apart and increase that gastrointestinal permeability, which leads to that toxic burden dump of those stomach contents, which drive more inflammation, that causes more issues with the blood-brain barrier, which ultimately sets up for mood instability, anxiety, stress, depression, and all the things we see when we have an unhealthy brain. The next thing that can go wrong is neurotransmitter production, and this has to do with that amino acid tryptophan. Tryptophan can go down good pathways or it can go down bad pathways. And let's talk about that. When you're calm, low inflammation, and everything is good, your body takes tryptophan and then makes serotonin. And then from serotonin, it can make melatonin. So now you've got your happy hormone serotonin, you've got your melatonin to help you at night, you're going to have more sleep and more happiness. But under periods of chronic stress, or you have inflammation, or you have infections, your body then converts that tryptophan to something called kynurenine, and then to something called quinolinic acid. And this has been known to be an excitatory transmitter. It's neuronally, it's inflammatory, and it's really toxic to the brain and can cause a whole host of mental health issues. There was a 2023 study that directly shows that under chronic inflammation, this depletes your serotonin and raises that quinolinic acid, which then creates an inflammatory depression state. So there's a direct link to that. And there's actually some studies show that certain gut microbiome can reduce inflammation and help the body then produce more serotonin from tryptophan and prevent it from preventing and producing this inflammatory quinolinic acid. So keep in mind, there's a lot of science showing that this is happening, especially for those that are under chronic stress. What if your gut bacteria get out of balance in something called dysbiosis? Like I said earlier, that's either too many bad bugs or not enough good bugs. And when this happens, this can be a wreck. The sad thing is there are so many things people do nowadays that create a dysbiosis situation. Those are things like chronic antibiotics, taking those PPIs that disrupt that pH of the stomach. This can cause dysbiosis. Also, too, ultra-processed foods, that doesn't feed the good bacteria, and this ultimately leads to less diversity in the gut. And once again, we have less diversity in the gut. We make less of those short-chain fatty acids butyrate, which then leads to more inflammation, which then leads to this feedback loop where things just get worse and worse. So when our gut bacteria are out of balance, this can lead ultimately to brain issues. So you know when your gut's out of balance, it also affects your mitochondria. They can't focus as well. They can't make as much ATP. They produce more reactive oxygen species. And now that begins to affect the brain because your brain has a massive amount of mitochondria. Things that are really important, like those short-chain fatty acids like butyrate and omega-3 can be a true rescuer here. Because unfortunately, if the mitochondria aren't working properly, this can lead to a lot of people to have that wired, tired feeling in the brain because the mitochondria just can't keep up with the energy production that they need to produce. And you know, when the gut's not healthy, you can't absorb your nutrients like you should, even if you're taking supplements and eating a good diet. Because if you have low stomach acid or you have poor bowel production, then that's going to lead to problems with the absorption of your B vitamins, magnesium, and zinc. And if these aren't properly being absorbed, you can't make your neurotransmitters like you should. So I think by now you can see the gut and brain talk, and there's way too much science to show that they don't. We've talked about all the things that could go wrong. So now how do we go about fixing that? So the first thing, we've got to work on fixing the gut so the brain can be healthy. And we do what's called a 5R program. The first thing is we want to remove all the problems. Those are cut out the processed foods, cut out the alcohol, and all those medications that affect the pH of the stomach or destroy that gut lining. Next, to remove harmful bacteria, we can do things like berberine, oregano oil, caprylic acid, or garlic, because these can actually help improve that bad bacteria balance and help bring the good bacteria back. Next, we want to replace and fix things. And some people do need digestive enzymes to help better break down their food, or even something like betaine because they don't have enough stomach acid. So those are critical. The next big thing is if you're missing a gallbladder, you really should be on some bile salts, because we've been talked about when the bile salts are out of balance, this can ultimately affect the brain, so taking a bile salt supplement may be something good to do. The next R is re-inoculate. This is putting good bacteria in the system, and there's a lot of studies out there showing now that certain bacteria, and I've talked about this in the past, are psychobiotics. They actually have the ability to work in the gut to improve the environment, help neurotransmitters reduce inflammation, and this ultimately translates to better brain health. Certain strains have been shown to be helpful. Those are things like Lactobacillus rhamnosus, which has actually been shown to lower cortisol. Things like Bifidobacterium longum, which has actually been shown to help with working memory. And so those are just a couple of the bacteria that have been shown to help with the brain. There's also things like the Lactobacillus reuteri, which has been shown to increase oxytocin levels, which actually can create more of a loving bonding aspect in terms of humans. So those are just some things to keep about specific strains to put back. If you struggle with traditional products, you might look at something called spore-based probiotics, because sometimes these tend to be held a little better and can be tolerated a little better by those that are struggling to put back traditional probiotics. And then the last thing is we've got to put those prebiotic fibers in there to help feed those good bacteria, and also polyphenols, because many of the newer strains like Akkermansia benefit from taking polyphenols as a food source, then that ultimately makes more butyrate, which leads to actually better brain health. The fourth R is repair, and this is all about repairing that gut lining and the many parts of the gut that are out of balance and fixing that. My favorite first thing is L-glutamine, and L-glutamine is like glue to hold that gut lining back together. Where those cells begin to fall apart and cause leaky gut, L-glutamine can actually help to seal those linings and prevent that from happening. Another item is zinc carnosine. This also can repair those tight junctions. Something really popular nowadays that can bind up that lipopolysaccharides and actually reduce those toxins is something called immunoglobulins, or something that you may see as like colostrum. These have the ability through immune response to calm down some of that inflammation, and some patients have really good success in terms of calming gut inflammation by using these products. And one of the biggest things that I've helped fix the gut, reduce inflammation, and lower and support brain health together is actually a high quality omega-3. You want to make sure you take a good quality product because if you don't, it actually can be irritating and upsetting to the gut. And lastly, look at antioxidants that have been shown to reduce inflammation, scavenge up those reactive oxygen species, and calm microglial inflammation. And some of my favorite things for that are N-acetylcysteine, which is the precursor to glutathione, curcumin, resveratrol, and quercetin. And then fifth R is rebalance. This is all about the lifestyle things you can do to help calm the body and improve your gut health, which ultimately improves your brain health. The first one is enhanced vagal tone. That's promote more of a parasympathetic, relaxing state and less of a sympathetic, stressed out state. Those are things like deep breathing, cold plunges, gratitude, breath work, and prayer. These are critical. Next is get adequate sleep. 7 to 9 hours is important to reset that melatonin, reset those circadian rhythms, and actually sleep's been shown to promote better microbial growth and more diversity in the gut. Something else you can do is exercise and get sunlight because both of these have been shown to increase those short-chain fatty acids. In actuality, there's some brand new studies just this year that show that intermittent fasting resets that gut microbiome and actually has been shown to improve your working memory. So keep these things in mind in terms of those 5R program to fix your gut from the top to the bottom to get your health back. I mentioned a lot of supplements, but a couple things that I didn't mention that can actually help with brain health is things like 1, magnesium threonate. This is a special type of magnesium that crosses that blood-brain barrier and promotes good calming anxiety, can promote better sleep, and actually enhance that plasticity of the brain to help with better memory and cognition. Next is digestive enzymes. If you have a lot of gas bloating immediately after you eat, it's probably digestion issues. And these digestive enzymes can further help break down your food. And unfortunately, as you get older, we don't produce as many digestive enzymes. So keep in mind, if you eat a lot of food, then you have a lot of GI upset, this actually can trigger brain fog later, and digestive enzymes have been shown to be helpful with that. And finally, if you have a lot of stress and you have high cortisol, one of the things you can also consider are adaptogens. Those are things like ashwagandha, rhodiola, ginseng, magnolia. Those are some things that have been shown to help lower cortisol, reset that HPA axis. We've been talked about how that can destroy your gut and set you up for better resilience for later, along with the lifestyle things to reduce your stress. So just a couple more science-backed lifestyle tips that have been shown to improve your gut health and ultimately your brain health, and that's sleep. If you don't get good restful sleep, and we're talking at least an hour to an hour and a half of REM deep sleep, your body doesn't reset that brain. It doesn't lay down your memories. And more importantly, that is when the body goes in there with the microglial and washes away and cleans up the brain and takes away all the toxins. So it's super important. If you don't have good sleep, you're not going to have good brain health. Work on stress, lower cortisol, make sure you're exercising because without exercise, you can't produce the short chain fatty acids like you should. And more importantly, you don't produce enough of that BDNF, which is like fertilizer for your brain. Get outside, get plenty of sunlight, make that vitamin D because vitamin D is also critical for brain health. And it's important also to getting outside in the sunshine because this actually keeps your gut microbiome healthier. And finally, work on those key relationships. There's a lot of data out there showing that with good community and good healthy relationships, that sense of belonging, that emotional connection with other people has actually been shown to improve your heart rate variability, which is tied to better gut health and better brain health, but more importantly, to calm that vagal tone to produce less of that sympathetic tone, to calm it, less high blood pressure, less issues there. So work on those strong connections. Work on those strong relationships that bring you a sense of community and health, not only to your gut, but also to your brain. So remember, when you heal your gut, you actually upgrade your brain. So keep in mind, if you know anybody that struggles with mental health and they aren't addressing gut issues, they're missing one of the biggest pictures that can make a difference. Because honestly, fixing your gut is better than any drug as a pharmacist that I can give you. So keep in mind, if this relates to you or someone that you know, make sure that you share this podcast because I think there is so much research being done in this area. And I can tell you, if you go look at social media, people are searching this out everywhere. This can make such a huge difference in terms of mental health, productivity in life, better relationships, and a happier marriage, and those type things that are so critical for a good brain health. So remember, keep searching for the truth about how the body works. And I hope you found out that today, if you don't fix your gut, you can't fix your brain. Have a great day.